Welcome back. Let's think about how marginal cost fits into our discussion of average total cost, average variable cost, and average fixed cost. I know, it's a ton of jargon for sure, but I think the intuition of this we can wrap our minds around relatively easily. Alright, so let's start by just walking through the diagram that's set up, and then we're going to think about the marginal cost piece, where our focus is. So average fixed cost decreases as the quantity of output increases, as the number of units increases, right? We just take, say, a firm's rent, and we divide by the number of units. Well, as they produce more units, that means that the average rent per unit, or the average fixed cost per unit of output, is decreasing. So that's this curve. But if we make the assumption of diminishing marginal product, in other words, that each additional unit of labor or capital is not going to be as effective as the prior one, that makes sense, right? Why does that make sense? Well, let's suppose that you're a hiring manager. Who's the first employee you hire? It's the best person you can find, right? They've got the best skills. Who's the second person you hire? It's hopefully another good person, but they're not as good as the first one, right? If they were as good or better than the first one, you would have hired them as the first one. So the second person probably still has good skills, but not as good as the first one. So each additional worker we hire is going to contribute less than the prior worker we hired. That's this idea of diminishing marginal product, in this case of labor when we're talking about workers. All right, so what does that lead to then? That leads to average variable cost increasing, right? Our cost of labor for each additional unit is going to increase because labor is not as productive as we produce more, because this next worker isn't as good as the prior worker we hired. Still good, not as good, right? So average variable cost is increasing with output. And then finally, what does that mean for average total cost? Why is it this U-shaped curve? Well, because early on at lower quantities, we see average fixed cost declining very quickly. And it outweighs this increase in our average variable cost. But as we produce more units, spreading out rent across more units doesn't have a very big effect, right? This decrease in average fixed cost becomes pretty small. It flattens out. And now this average variable cost increase, trying to find another worker and paying them but not getting as much out of them, now that outweighs the decrease in the average fixed cost. So we get this U-shaped average total cost. All right, so where does marginal cost come into this? So for the first unit, right, the cost of producing that first unit, that marginal cost of it, is the same as the average variable cost. But the cost of producing the next unit increases. So marginal cost is increasing, but it's increasing at a faster rate than average variable cost. So why is it increasing at a faster rate? So if your marginal cost of your next unit is higher than the last unit, what does that do to your average? It brings it up. But is your average as high as that marginal cost? Nope, it's not there yet. So think about this with your GPA. Suppose you get a 4.0 GPA this semester, right? That's going to pull up your average GPA. Is it going to pull it all the way up to 4.0? No, because you've got, well, maybe, hopefully you have a 4.0, but if not, you probably have some prior grades that get factored in, right? We're a lower number. So it's the same thing when we're talking about marginal cost increasing, is it's going to pull up the average. So how does this work? So marginal cost increases faster than average variable cost. And eventually it crosses the average total cost curve. So this is our marginal cost curve. All right, so where does it cross? It crosses average total cost at the minimum of it. So let's put a couple notes and think about why. So marginal cost crosses average total cost at the minimum average total cost. So why does the marginal cost curve cross average total cost at the minimum of average total cost? That seems like quite a coincidence, right? But not really. If we think about sort of the intuition of it, this goes back to the same story we told with GPA, etc. If the cost of the next unit is greater than our average cost of units right now, what happens to the average cost of units? They're going to increase. So if we sort of think about the two halves here, right, at lower quantities, what's our story over here? Our marginal cost is less than the average total cost. So the cost of producing an extra unit is less than the average cost of units. Well, why is that the case? Because you still have this fixed cost that's still pretty big per unit. So therefore, increasing units means that average total cost decreases. But at some point, right, these two things cross. So now, as marginal cost has been increasing, it's been approaching the average. Eventually, that marginal cost crosses over the average. So now we've got marginal cost greater than our average total cost. So what does that mean? That means that increasing the number of units is going to lead to average total cost increasing, right? If the next unit costs more than average, then that's going to pull up our average total cost. That's the idea here. So marginal cost crosses average total cost at the minimum average total cost. Why? Because if marginal cost is less than average total cost, increasing units decreases the average total cost, right? This is this section. So if marginal cost is less than the average, then if we produce another unit at below average cost, what's going to happen? That's going to pull down our average cost. And here's sort of the crossover point. And if marginal cost is greater than average total cost, then increasing units will increase our average total cost. So at what point do these curves cross and run into each other? It's got to be at the point where our average total cost is at the bottom, at its minimum. Because our marginal cost is below average total cost, all the way up into the point until they're equal to each other, where they cross. And once we produce beyond that, now our marginal cost is greater than our average total cost. So we end up with a marginal cost curve crossing the average total cost curve at the minimum average total cost. Again, this is a lot of jargon. It's a lot coming very quickly. I understand. But if you spend a few minutes thinking this through intuitively, trying to tell yourself the story of the firm and their output and their costs, I bet you can figure it out. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.